Welcome to another CXL feed. My name is Fred Pike. In this lesson, we're going to focus on two recent changes that Google made to the GA4 export to BigQuery. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to make the GA4 to BigQuery connection. In my mind, it's one of the biggest advantages of GA4. It's built in, it's easy to set up, and even better, for almost all small to medium-sized websites, it's free. So go ahead and set it up if you haven't done so already. Another advantage of the GA4 to BigQuery connection is that Google keeps adding functionality, and July 2024 was an on-fire month for them. There were several updates, and I want to focus on two of them. The first update was the addition of 3 additional fields that let you know exactly in what order events were processed by GA4. This addition lets you focus on accurately building a user journey throughout your website. The second change, which is huge and long requested, is the addition of session traffic information into BigQuery. Traditionally, there's only been first user information, so how a user first found your website. But now there's session information, which everybody has been asking for a long time. Let's dive into the first change, the batch events, and see what the data looks like before these 3 additional fields got added. So I've gone ahead and created a quick query, a pretty simple query that just tells us the user pseudo ID, i.e. the thing that identifies one specific user, and then when the event happened through a timestamp, the bundle sequence ID, and that's how Google gave us information before about the bundles. When hits get sent to GA4, they are frequently bundled together in a bundle sequence ID. And so if we look at what we have down here, we've got some information about this is all one user. So these first 4 rows is the same user. The timestamp you can see for the first 3 was exactly the same. And the bundle sequence ID was also the same. So the event name of first visit, session start, and page view all happened within one bundle. But in what order? And that's something that has bugged people for a long time in dealing with BigQuery. Because if you're trying to exactly map out a customer journey, or if you're trying to debug a problem, knowing the exact sequence can be really, really useful. And you didn't have a way to do that natively in BigQuery before, but now you do. They've added 3 new fields, a batch page ID, batch ordering ID, and the batch event index. And basically, the batch page ID stays the same as long as you're on the same page. The batch ordering ID is, okay, this is the first batch of events that got sent. This is the second batch. This is the third batch. And then the batch event index is within that first batch, this was the first event. This was the second event. So it's pretty easy to understand. So let's see what that looks like. Here's another query with these extra new fields added. And now we have that same information and that same bundle sequence ID, etc. But we have these new fields over here. So we have a batch page ID. Again, that is the same as long as the page doesn't change. Within that page, the very first batch that got sent was these 3 events in this order. So first visit was the first event that got sent over, that got recognized by GA4. Session start was the second event within that batch, and page view was the third one. Now on that same page, but starting a second batch, the first event that came up in that batch was the fetch user data. Cool, so now we can actually see exactly the order by which these events got sent to GA4. And we can, if we really wanted to track that user journey, we could do that. We have the data. Let's look at another example here. Starting on row 62, we have the same user. We can tell that from the user pseudo ID with many different events coming through. We have the ones that we just saw, first visit, session start, and page view. Those are all on the same pages, the same batch order. They're all in the first batch in event position 1, 2, and 3. Cool. Fetch user data, it's the same page, but you can see based on the timestamp, let me move that out a little bit. based on the timestamp that it came a little bit later, so it was actually in a second batch, but it was the first one within that batch. Then we have more things that that user did. And what's really interesting, what I've noticed so far, is that that first visit session start page view, we have a break between the page view and the fetch user data. Every other time that we have that, at least in this data set that I've looked at, the page view and the fetch user data are actually treated kind of unusually. Look, it's the same page ID, the same batch order, number one, but the batch index is the same as well. You would expect it to be 1 and 2, right? So what's happening there? I think what's happening, let me show you the Google Tag Manager container that is doing that. This is the tag that sends a page view, and it has a tag sequencing, a cleanup tag of the GA4 get client ID and session ID, which is this event, the fetch user data. So if you have a cleanup tag in your config tag or in any other tag, it looks to me, at least based on this, that it's going to show up as the exact same batch ID and index too. Kind of interesting. But everything else shows up as a different event index. We have a scroll here, which has, it's the second batch, the first item in it. We have a team page, so they went onto a different page. Oh, that's a definite custom event that we have in this GA4 property. So the advantage of this is that you can explicitly track the user journey. And where this is going to be most helpful for me is when I'm debugging some really critical error that is sometimes dependent on in which order that event got sent. So this is going to be a real boon for debugging. And I encourage you to try to just get a sense for, oh, these events flow together. These events were in a separate batch. And you really get a sense for what is happening with your data as it gets sent to GA4. It's pretty cool. I really like it. Now, one thing I want to talk about, Google is saying they're new. Now, that's not quite true, but let me show you what happens if you try to go back in time and use these fields, a batch page ID, ordering ID, and index, event index. If I change this date from, instead of looking at July 20th of 2024, which is what I'm looking at right now, what I had been looking at, I'm going to change it to July 9th, which is the day before this change rolled out. So I'm going to try to run that, and I get an error. Unrecognized name, batch page ID. It doesn't know what it is because that batch page ID didn't exist as a separate item, as a separate upper level item before July 9th. If I change it to July 10th, now I can run it. Oh, I guess not. So when did it change? 11th maybe? There, on the 11th of July is when that change actually occurred, rolled out to the schema, at least this particular schema. One quick point I want to make is that two of these fields actually existed before. The page ID and the ordering ID were actually in the event parameters. And let's take a look at what I mean by that. But the event index is new. So if we go over to our schema, we have the page ID, the ordering ID, and the event index. That is new. That's now at the highest level. They used to be buried within the event parameters. And what do I mean by that? Here's an event. Here are all the event parameters, things like the page location, etc. And you can see that batch page ID and batch ordering ID were buried there, or not buried, but were included in the event parameters. So we did have that before. Now we just have them at a higher level, i.e. they're more easily accessible, and we have the new event index as well. So Google says they're new. Yeah, that's kind of true, but the really new one is the event index, and that's the one that's really cool because that does tell us the exact order in which the events happened. The next thing I want to talk about, the next change that Google announced, is adding session traffic source information. And this is great. As you know, Within analytics, we have user acquisition, which is how a user first found your website, right? And we have traffic acquisition, which is how they found you in the most recent session. And most of the time, I certainly, and most people, work with that session information. I guess it's interesting to know how that user first found you the very first time they found your website, but most of the time you really care about the session. So the fact that in GA4, in the BigQuery export, you didn't have the session information was really painful. And there were several workarounds, all of which involved really deep SQL language. There's several different blogs that have these SQL queries available. But now you don't have to use them. Now it's built in. Thank you, Google. So let's take a look at that. Back to BigQuery. We're going to look at the new user. And what I'm going to show you is what we had before, what showed up in the schema. And let me just show you that super quickly. In the schema, you had traffic source, name, medium, and source. And a lot of people thought, oh, that's probably session source and session medium. No, that's first user. So now we have session traffic source last click, which is gives us a lot of information for manual or Google Ads campaigns. So I'm going to pull some of this information out, and let's take a look at that in my query, where I'm using the traffic source, which again is first user, and session, which is session. So let's run that query. And again, I'm running it just for one day. And there's not going to be a lot of interesting information here, but I'll show you what we're now able to report on in BigQuery and potentially in Looker Studio or some other data visualization tool, which can go directly against BigQuery as well. So it's great that we have this in BigQuery now. But here's an example. So user source is the first time they came to us, Kenosha Chamber, and it's an email, and you see that session source is the same thing. So this is a first user of somebody who first came to the website. Moving down the list a little bit, we can see somebody that came direct for the first time and came through LinkedIn the second time. It may not be the second time, it's going to be the most recent time. We also have another interesting user on the next page, I think record 72. Yeah, so this person originally came to the website via ZipRecruiter, and then they came back through Google Organic. So the fact that this is now in BigQuery is giving everybody huge cause for celebration. I hope you share my excitement about these two recent changes to the GA4 export to BigQuery. Being able to accurately lay out a user journey through the batch sequencing changes is great. Even better, we finally have session information in BigQuery, something we've been dying for years and years now. I have read that the data may not be perfect, but there will be additional tweaks coming, and it's so much better than what we had available before. So good job, Google, and thank you finally for this. Now it's up to you. If you don't have the GA4 to BigQuery connection made, go ahead and make it. If you do have it made, I've shown you how to use these new fields. Go ahead and try them on your own data. There's nothing like seeing the new additions with your own data for it to click and say, oh, now I get it. This makes sense. And now I have a request for you. This is the third CXL feed that I have done. We would love to hear from you what topics you would like us to address. The purpose of the CXL feeds is to have a short bit of information on something that's really topical and hopefully is of great use to you. So please let us know, contact us. What would you like us to discuss? We'd love to hear your thoughts. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks a lot.